Human smuggling and trafficking is not humane. Illegal immigration funds criminal networks, ruthless gangs, and the flow of deadly drugs. Only by upholding national borders can we break this cycle and establish a real foundation for prosperity.
Patriotism is the exact opposite of nationalism. Nationalism is its betrayal.
Nationalists versus globalists. It's the political divide of our era. On one side stands those with a fierce devotion and loyalty to their own country, its interests, its people, its borders, and its laws. On the other rests a group obsessed with placing the assumed interests of the entire world above those of individual nations. The sort of people who look at the architecture, art, music, literature, and diverse cultures of Western civilization and think, you know what those places really need? A little enrichment, a la acid attacks, grooming gangs, rape epidemics, Sharia law, and the spectacle of terror. So, who's winning? One glance at the electoral wins in recent history from Europe to North America to South America, and one might say that the nationalists are out front. But in this video, I'm going to make the case that Team Globalist is about to eclipse our victorious battles with a single document which spells the final death blow for every signatory nation in this war. I present to you the United Nations Global Compact for Safe, Orderly, and Regular Migration, or as I like to call it, the National Suicide Pact. Now, if you haven't already heard of this deal until now, you're likely not alone. There's been a virtual media blackout on the topic in countries like mine up here in Canada. Now, this 34-page National Suicide Pact is laden with all the usual internationalist buzzwords and mumbo-jumbo, but one needn't read between the lines or inject conjecture to understand the sweeping devastation this document will hail. In a sentence, this pact makes migration a human right, wherein every signatory nation will de facto and de jure hand over its sovereignty to the unelected and unaccountable United Nations. Don't believe me? See for yourself. First things first, there is no mention of the term illegal anywhere in the document. Instead, throughout it, illegals, economic migrants, and refugees become conflated classes, all coming together under one group that has a human right to go where they please, when they please, for whatever reason, in the most comfortable way possible. Moreover, migration, for any reason, is something that needs to be promoted, enabled, and protected. The UN's National Suicide Pact, which almost all UN member states, by the way, will sign in Morocco come early December, is divided into 23 objectives. Here are just a few of the most alarming ones, and you'll forgive me if I summarize, but if you wish to be more thorough, do feel free to pause this video and read for yourself. I'm just not a complete sadist who wishes to drag present company through the globalist wonk word salad. First, signatory states must advertise, actively promote, and enable migration to our countries. This looks like everything from centralized websites detailing how to get into our country to details on how to get a job or free education, not to mention cost of life. Translation, not only are we supposed to erase our borders, but we're supposed to market our open borders to the third world, so that way they can decide who's got the most gibs and where said gibs are easiest to collect. So once we've enticed these blatant economic migrants to choose our country as the most plenteous, well, signatory nations must then ensure smooth sailing to our shores. The pact compels nations to reduce risks and vulnerabilities so-called migrants face at different stages of their journeys into our backyard. Translation, Dinghies, rafts, and long walks to the welfare state are really risky business. Sea vessels and land transport vehicles for mass migrant movement on your dime are coming right up. To boot, nations are expected to provide so-called migrants with info along their journey. Info like what fake refugees' rights are, what sorts of services are available that could benefit them, and do so in a language they understand. Because realistically speaking, what does a taxpayer have to lose by providing a little info on my rights for these precious newcomers? So, after they've been recruited and shipped comfortably to our countries, fully aware of their rights and newfound privileges on our dime, what are we responsible for once they actually arrive? Well, once the migrant masses arrive, signatory nations will commit to all of this. More info about the jackpot they just scored, legal aid, access to work and residence permits, and access to basic services, whatever that means. And it doesn't stop there. Migrants, according to the agreement, must also be, quote, empowered to realize full inclusion and social cohesion in their new countries. This means, among other things, that countries must promote mutual respect for migrant cultures, traditions, and blah, blah, blah. Yeah, because remember, kids, all cultures are equal. Where you say female genital mutilation, almost all of Somalia says female genital beautification. And you best respect that or else, bigot. And it goes on. These literal welfare migrants will be afforded the same rights to education, the labor market, and health care as citizens. Oh, you know, those schleps who just worked their asses off and paid into our social security systems for over the past 50 years. Those people. So, what happens if you disagree with all this enrichment? What happens if, heck, you're not even on Team Nationalists? You're just an average Joe who thinks the integrity of our national borders ought to be maintained, that migration for any reason to any country from anywhere is not, as the UN would have us believe, a human right? I mean, erasing territorial boundaries without a democratic mandate is sort of a big deal, one that will bring a little bit of change. That's something that even the UN recognizes, that even before this sinister document has been signed, societies, read Western societies, okay, that we're undergoing a tremendous amount of demographic, economic, and social change as a result of migration. So let's say you're a journalist who wants to talk about all this change. Well, the UN Suicide Pact has some pretty choice clauses for media in disagreement with their plan to put the entire Westphalian nation-state system in a complete and utter headstand. Simply put, disagreement with this agenda will not be tolerated, because signatory states will work to dispel, quote, misleading narratives that generate negative perceptions of their precious little migrants. Okay, so this part I have to read in full because it is just so damn Orwellian. Member states will, quote, promote independent, objective, and quality reporting of media outlets, including internet-based information, including by sensitizing and educating media professionals on migration-related issues and terminology, investing in ethical reporting standards in advertising, and stopping allocation of public funding or material support. What does that mean? To media outlets that systematically promote intolerance, xenophobia, racism, and other forms of discrimination towards migrants in full respect of the freedom of the media. Yeah, that's how you respect the media. Tell them what to write, fund the ones who listen, and eliminate those who don't. The pact literally compels nations to eliminate all forms of discrimination, condemn and counter expressions, acts, and manifestations of racism, racial discrimination, violence, xenophobia, and related intolerance against all migrants. Note here that the agreement doesn't deign to actually define what constitutes so-called racism or xenophobia, never mind so-called related intolerance, whatever the hell that means. Now, if you're as black-pilled as I am about the prospect of any nation surviving this suicide pact, Here is the silver lining. A handful of based and red-pilled nations have announced that they will withdraw from this self-slaughter. The US, Hungary, Slovakia, Poland, Austria, and Australia are, at the time of taping this video, the 6 sole states out of the 193 UN member states who have said hard pass to this pact. Now, for my countrymen up here in the Great White North thinking, dear God, help us, yeah. It's even worse for we Canucks. According to Canada's Immigration and Refugees Minister, who is, by the way, himself a Somalian refugee, Canada will lead the charge on the UN's migrant plan. He admits that Canada was actively involved in drafting the compact, that Canada was one of the first countries to offer concrete suggestions for the pact, and that Canada is committed to bullying all the other nations into realizing the pact's, quote, ambitious goals. Why? Because the pact is in Canada's interests? You know, Canada, the country paying this chump's salary and whose government he works for? Nope. Because of the Middle East and Africa. Canada's paving the way to a more severe, permanent global migration crisis because we're looking out for Turkey, Lebanon, Uganda, and Bangladesh. His words, not mine. And all of this comes just after Prime Minister Justin Trudeau signed Bill C-76, which allows for some, 2 million non-resident Canadians to vote, people who do not pay taxes in Canada, and many of whom will never return to live here. And that, my friends, is the trouble with the globalist mindset. This pathological altruism and obsession with morality for thee totally neglects morality for you and me, the nation's taxpayers and voters, the senior citizens spending the sunset of their life with a slashed pension owing to the national austerity measures, Joe and Jane's six-pack, mom and dad to 3, handing over almost half of their paychecks to the government so that they in turn can pay these migrant money pits for doing absolutely nothing besides showing up. The millions of millennials and college students who will never know a job with benefits, and many of whom won't ever likely get the chance to retire because our politicians are too busy looking after men of military age from another continent to pay attention to us. It's clown world. This pact isn't about charity. It's highway robbery of our nation's heritage, our future. This pact isn't about human rights. It's about injecting the radical ideas of unelected, unaccountable bureaucrats into the national legislature of countries who were never asked if we wanted to be invaded in the first place. Thanks everyone for tuning in. I know it was a longer video. It's a bit of a doozy, a lot of material to get through. Look, if you're a Canadian like myself and you are against this out-of-control compact, I'd urge you to click on this petition. I've got the link in my YouTube video below. Maxime Bernier, the leader of the PPC, started it, and it's basically calling for an end to all this, so please go ahead, put your name down there. Other than that, if you like what you just saw, I'd urge you to click like and subscribe below, smash those buttons, and feel free to head over to faithgoldie.ca and feel free to contribute to my journalism.